You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is mean seasons. All right, Joshua. So I feel like Walcott, in our current state of affairs, having a character or a villain as a calendar feels particularly timely for some reason. Like where all the seasons just blend together and they blur together.
Yeah.
And then you gotta
as much as the calendar matters to us at all, Calendar Girl reminding us that, yes, the movement of time actually does matter despite what 2020 has done to our brains. That is legit. Oh, man.
Yes, all the seasons blur together in 1 week. Yeah, all the time. Yeah, no, this is good. Hey, Joshua, I got to say, when I read the synopsis for this, I was like, two things. I don't remember seeing this one. And two, I was like, this feels like it's going to be a throwaway episode. Boy, was I wrong.
I mean, in a way, it is a throwaway episode, and I want to talk about that a little further down the line, but it shouldn't be because Calendar Girl is great.
Oh, yeah. Calendar Girl's great. I think that she's not quite speaking in riddles, but like lots of play on words with the season. So see you in the fall, Batman. Another season, another reason to be making trouble. I love the little catchphrases. They were lots of fun. Plus, her wardrobe was A+. Speaking of wardrobe, Joshua, actually, before we go any further, with this episode starting in a fashion show, I knew that you were going to be taking a special interest in at least the aesthetics of everything in this episode. So what were your thoughts on Calendar Girl costumes, but also the fact that they had a fashion show at the beginning? I thought that was lots of fun.
Well, let's hit the fashion show and the car show when we get into the discussion of the actual episode, because I think that you actually have sort of a good idea, bad idea, or good example, bad example kind of thing going on there, especially with the fashion show in terms of the fact that we have seen such a thing on Superman, the animated series also. So let me put a pin in those and really get serious about Calendar Girl, because I personally love her entire deal. Okay. Gender flipping the lackluster Calendar Man in order to give this character more pathos and an actual motivation is an inspired choice. I love it very, very much. Calendar Man is one of those, one-off or toss-off Silver Age goofy Batman villains where they were just like, what's the gag, And sometimes that really works, right? Like eventually they found their place with the Joker and Catwoman and Riddler, and sometimes it really doesn't work. We're all still trying to figure out how the hell Penguin fits into all of this, right? But Calendar Man is one of those that's more in the Penguin end of the pool. And I have to say that this group of creators just gender flipping that and taking on like systemic sexism through the lens of a supervillain is rock solid stuff. I really love it. And I love how it permeates her entire design. Like her real name, her civilian name is Paige Monroe. So we're already nodding at Betty Page and Marilyn Monroe, right? That is very good. The super simplistic approach to her base outfit is great. I think it really suggests her connection to the fashion world while also really being almost a blank slate that she can just layer seasonal and holiday trappings onto. It's always a Calendar Girl outfit, and recognizably so, but it's also able to be really different every time we see her. It's so good. And the simplicity of the base outfit gives me an opportunity, I think, to get a little dig in here on modern DC Comics, the DCEU, and to a lesser but nevertheless still true extent, the MCU. Here is a lesson they should all learn. Simplicity in superhero looks is almost always going to be a better idea than really getting over busy and crazy. And Calendar Girl is just a fantastic example of this. And my final thought on Calendar Girl is how brilliant is she using candy corn, the world's actual worst candy, as a weapon? That is great. All of this makes me very happy. Caleb, what did you think about Calendar Girl?
Oh, I love Calendar Girl because before this, my most interesting encounter with Calendar Man was in, I think it was Arkham City, when you had to
sure, yeah,
you had like those tasks you had to complete or whatnot to complete some sort of side mission. So I honestly have no fondness, not really any strong memories of Calendar Man, even though I know I've seen him in a couple of other animated programs somewhere or another. But no strong opinion. I think again, this feels in a lot of ways to me, Joshua, like one of the stronger villain origin stories since the redesign. And I don't know, I don't recall if they actually end up doing any more with this ever, but it felt like they, similar to like Mr. Freeze, back in BTAS days, where they're looking at it and they're like, this character's kind of boring. What can we do to make him interesting? What if we make Calendar Man a woman? Okay, well, what would she struggle with? Well, what if she was actually like a world-class model? Okay, and then we can start talking about systemic sexism, and then we can start talking about the double standard for women in the world, which again, I think is incredible. And frankly, given our criticisms around gender on this in this universe so far, I thought it was one of the better, more fascinating looks at women as villains, just women as characters in the
I agree.
DCAU.
Yeah.
Because it's been real spotty. I'm of course thinking back to our initial conversation about Catwoman, for example, where you're like, ooh, these guys can't write women. Well, this episode really, I think, they were stepping up their game.
I agree completely. And okay, there's a little bit of a meta conversation to be had there, right? Like, I think it is fascinating that this group of writers who, as you say, we've pointed out before, are not exactly the best when it comes to writing the ladies, would come up with this big idea. Except it's not that surprising that they would come up with this big idea, because in this very episode, there are still some places where their blind spots vis-a-vis the male gaze and sexism still come out. So it's kind of an awesome cautionary tale to just men moving through the world, right? Like, you can be aware of this much bigger picture problem and still take part in the sort of lower key microaggression stuff without even thinking those are difficult things to hold in both hands, right? Like, you can sort of realize that the ocean is wet without realizing your own fishbowl is wet, I guess, to carry my favorite metaphor of the fish having to realize that water is wet before they can do something about it. It's really great. Like, there's amazing stuff going on in this episode for us to discuss. There's amazing stuff going on around this episode for us to discuss. And Calendar Girl is just an amazing lightning rod for all of it. I really like it. But we so want to talk about this episode, and that should tell you how good the episode is. But we got to talk about these henchmen because I love them.
Yeah, okay.
I also love them.
So yes, the henchmen, who I swear they literally went to Vegas, stole members of the Cirque du Soleil, and that's where she recruited. She went down to the Vegas Strip and said, "Hey, you, either like Chippendales or one of the Cirque du Soleil members. I've seen men dressed like this, and it was in Las Vegas." So
yes,
I think that is exactly where she pulled it. I thought it was really great and a nice little. I think I think you noted this as well, but just the gender swap. So Chippendales. Those are the men. For those of you who haven't been to Vegas, and by the way, I'm not recommending you go to Vegas because I actually hate Vegas, but
it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah. But you'll go down there and there'll be billboards with men dressed exactly like this, and it's like the whole idea is that it's pleasure for women sort of thing, and it's the male stripper vibe, right? And I love that her henchmen basically are male strippers that look like they're from Chippendales down in Vegas or Magic Mike. They look like the Channing Tatum, Matthew McConaughey movie from a decade or so ago. They're just taken straight out of those movies, which are all about objectifying the men. So anyway, love the gender reversal, and again, just kind of really, that's one of the details they didn't have to include in this episode to prop up the themes, but man, what a nice touch.
It also works as a costume in the same way that Calendar Girls does, right? Like, you have a base look that is so simple, you can layer almost anything on top of it to let them be part of her holiday theme, right? We get some holiday stuff, some Christmas stuff. We get like red, white, and blue Uncle Sam's top hats, added on. It is absolutely we complained, right? Let's think back. We complained about how we weren't sure that this Snow Bunny look for the henchwomen made sense from Mr. Freeze, right? Here we have a gender flip of that idea that 100% makes sense with the supervillain main character. Like this idea of, well, we're just going to objectify dudes a little bit, utterly fits in with Calendar Girl. I couldn't be more excited. This is really some of the best new design work we've seen on this show, and it's so simple.
Right. No, again, I think just the way it really supports the themes, you know, again, about the objectification of women in the media and the double standard. And I think like those are the details that made me think they really thought through how they were going to, you know, reintroduce this character, or I guess introduce this character in this universe, and said, hey, kind of in this, like I said, going back to Mr. Freeze, tying Mr. Freeze is all about revenge. What, you know, they're doing the same thing for Calendar Girl, but her revenge is based purely off of, hey, you aged out and we're going to toss you aside. You know, similar and a little, again, similar to Mr. Freeze in the same way of like, hey, big corporate overlord gets what he needs and then tossed aside, right? And I think if you dig deeper into like how women have historically been treated, it's still, I would say, largely treated in media today, at least in the United States, if not worldwide. I mean, this is actually still pretty timely, I would say, you know. Hey, your career.
That's the saddest part of it, Caleb. That is the saddest part of it. This episode of this show could air today and be just as topical, if not more topical, than the day it originally dropped. It's both impressive and sad.
It's I think my thought is the culture is more woke to the fact that this is a problem, but I still don't think we're anywhere near like actually solving it. So it's kind of this weird thing where, so in a lot of ways, this episode does feel ahead of its time in that way, because I do not think there was this level of self-awareness, at least in the zeitgeist in the 90s. I mean, there were, of course, feminist critics. There were people, but I'm saying like on the mainstream level, I just wanted, you know, again, we're getting really into the weeds here, but like the Me Too era, 2017, really. Yeah, yes. So there is a conversation, I think more conversation happening now than there was, you know, 20 years ago. That said, massive problem. And this, because of that, I say all that to say, Joshua, yes, if this episode came out today, I'd be like, wow, this is like right in the cusp of the conversation around gender and media. Whereas it came out 20 years ago. So I just kudos to the writers on that, because I think it's, especially for children's programming, very ahead of its time.
Yes, I really agree. All of that is spot on. The impressiveness is that they were able to write something so progressive in thought that it's still, you know, finger on the pulse today. The sad part is we haven't fixed any of it. Nope. It's been 20 years and we literally have fixed none of it. We just now are sort of hyper aware of it. But even then, that's only sort of pockets of the creator culture. It's not necessarily even like a widespread idea. It's a widespread enough idea that you can't pretend it's not real, right, and still expect to be taken seriously as a creator or critic or commentator. But it's not reached this critical mass where we're actually doing something about it yet. I hope we are getting close, I think, you know, but yeah, it's very sad. It's that's the sad part, is how great for them. They wrote something that's progressive and topical, that it's still topical. Sad for the rest of us that it's still topical. It's exactly that it's still topical. And, you know, again, I don't want to get like too into the weeds here. I think there is a lot of, especially since 2017, there's a lot of conversation happening in Hollywood. And thanks to the democratization of like just content creation, largely through like YouTube and like the giants like Netflix and Amazon, who are now just like, get all the content on our things. We are getting more stories told by women. It's certainly not where it needs to be, anywhere close. So I don't want to say problem solved. I just think it's interesting, because it really does feel like this is the type of episode that would come out today and be like, hey guys, this is something we're talking about in Hollywood, like in our culture, but the mainstream wasn't ready for it. I don't know. We live in an interesting time, because it's like I think the analogy I would say is like, you walk into you're in a building, and we've reached the point where we all now know, well, at least enough people know, people who are making decisions on the types of stories being told are like, oh, hey, look, there's a leak. And now after people have been telling us for like 30, 40, 50, 60 years that there's a leak, I can now see there's a leak. All right, cool. So I can see there's a leak. All right. And everyone's like, all right, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to look at this leak for a little while.
It's not really solving the problem, just kind of acknowledging its existence. Just weird.
It's true. That's the sort of the bad news, right? But I'm going to fold this into how Calendar Girl could have just been this absolute phenomenon, because this remains a systemic problem. This sexism, this aging out, this you're not worth anything as a woman in media once you're older than 40 is a systemic problem that has not gone away. So whether or not Calendar Girl herself kills her specific enemies, the people that she's decided to make the face of this problem because they were the face of this problem in her life, whether or not she's able to gain vengeance on them, she remains an extremely topical villain. There is no end to the stuff that she could blow up or kidnap or destroy or ransom in the name of her war on gross men. And that is a huge opportunity for Batman as a character to feel conflicted about his stopping her. It's an even more nuanced or modern approach, like we're finally getting for Catwoman, who generally only steals from terrible rich people, so let her, or Poison Ivy, who only murders people that unrepentantly destroy the environment. So maybe let her? I mean, I'm not advocating murder in the name of the ecosystem. I'm saying Batman taking a step back and saying, man, I'm sort of more on their side than not, but I don't love their methods. He could get to that place with Calendar Girl also. She could have been one of these real talk, like classic new villains, but we're still talking about friggin' Calendar Man for no apparent reason. It's very good.
I would love it. And I don't, again, Joshua, you have your fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the comics much more than me, but I think like, let's bring this character back in this way, because at least because like Calendar Man to me doesn't really represent a strong idea, but the Calendar Girl, as they wrote her in this episode, huge. I mean, just stands for so much. And I love how you pointed out. Again, I think I'm gonna sound like beating a dead horse, but the Mr. Freeze thing. Yeah, Mr. Freeze is trying to kill a scumbag who screwed him over. I kind of don't blame him. In fact, I kind of want him to. But that's where Batman has to find that middle ground where he's like, well, you're right, but also you can't kill people. So even though the person that they have vengeance against are guilty, and I also like how the people that she wants to seek vengeance on all represent different aspects of the machine. You have people who like kind of like her, the person who owns the fashion company. You have the person who kind of wrecked her acting career. You know what I mean? Like they all kind of represent a different facet of society that basically said, you're too old. We can't use you anymore. And it's extremely unfortunate that this is still a problem. But I do think that the episode does a good job at writing the middle line of saying, well, her killing people, probably not great, but also these guys are scumbags. Like the guys she's going after are bad people who are ruining people's lives. And I think that's, I mean, I don't know, Josh, you tell me. I think that is where you get the most interesting Batman stories, because even he's conflicted.
Yes, absolutely.
When Batman's conflicted about the moral conundrum in front of him, he has to wrestle with it, and when he's wrestling with it, he's interrogating things about himself, which, by the way, ties into another kind of discrimination subplot in this episode that we haven't even mentioned yet, with the ageism piece, right? Like I
have so many pins I need to put in things, because that is a whole other box that we need to open at some point.
We do. Okay, so I won't get ahead of us, but I will say, though, I think those two are linked. Those two themes of like being aging out of your prime and being cast aside because you don't meet that magic spot. And in the case of the Wayne Enterprises employee, 65, that's when people retire, right? And then in the case of Calendar Girl, you're 30, and we're going for a younger demographic, so you're gonna have to go.
That's why I want to talk about it in so much more detail, because I feel that they are supposed to be linked, but they are linked so poorly that I think the Bruce Wayne getting old / Wayne Enterprises subplot is actually my biggest example of the writers of this show sort of getting wrapped around their own axle of, but men too, which is, and it doesn't work. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. Okay, well, let's focus on Calendar Girl first, because I don't.
It's a whole. There's so many cans of worms in this episode, and I appreciate it. Like because I'll give you an example of them doing a good job of this. Okay, so one of Calendar Girl's enemies that she considers to be the face of her battle against patriarchy is a white woman
Right.
Okay. That is extremely, whether they did it on purpose or not, right? Whatever they meant to do as the writers and creators, that is an extremely nuanced and clever look, because I have often heard from many feminist thinkers, both thinking about feminism like as a philosophy, and also the people who are doing sort of more cultural criticism, like at the level that we're trying to be at here. I've often heard this quote, I don't know where it started, but like, white women are the handmaidens of the patriarchy. And so, yeah, some women to an extent benefit from this mess. Well, right? And it's worth noticing that and seeing that Calendar Girl, again, whether she's doing it on purpose or whether she's eyes deep in her own, revenge plot, it isn't just I hate men or men are bad. It's a bigger capital P patriarchy that's bad, including the women that try and capitalize off of it. That's awesome.
That gets into an interesting track of feminist theory. I am in no way qualified to make the statements, but I will say I have had these conversations in my life, and I'm not saying I agree with them, but I just find it to be an interesting viewpoint, because it kind of goes back to strip clubs. Are women being objectified or empowered? And I would say that there's, while one of these options seems like kind of obvious to me, the objectification angle. I have heard other feminists who say, no, this is they're gaming. This is how they're taking advantage of the system. This is how they're profiting, and then you have also other women who are utilize ties patriarchy and capitalism go hand in hand there,
Absolutely.
And people who say, all right, well, this is just the system we have, so I'm going to game it to my own advantage, because people have gamed, like in my life, have gamed it to their advantage, So it's just, you're kind of perpetuating the system rather than trying to solve the problem. Anyway, I am not a qualified feminist theorist, but I will say I have had conversations where there's more nuance there than I guess I would have expected. And I don't think this episode delves really into it, but yes, Joshua, by placing a woman as one of her one of the people who ruined her life, I think it does leave that on the table so what is the role of women, especially white women, who are profiting in the system?
Absolutely. I think we see that kind of even-handedness play out through the rest of the episode in one way that I think they did on purpose, and in another way that they didn't maybe do on purpose. And the part that I think they didn't do on purpose, because it's kind of a bad example, is you mentioned the fashion show, right?
Right.
I love this fashion show. I think that it is leaps and bounds ahead of the fashion that we saw on the Superman fashion show, which again, season 1 of the new Batman Adventures was coming out at the same time as season 2 of Superman the Animated Series. So it's in a way not fair to compare them. Like, they got a little more money, they had a little more time, they put a little more thought into it. But nevertheless, let's look at these. This fashion show is both less male gazy in its framing, and also the fashion is so much more fashionable, right? For lack of a better term. The flip of that is when we go to the car show, there's all these booth babes that we do not make any kind of commentary on, right? Like, they're just there.
It's weird. It's really weird. I actually noted that as well. There are a lot of scantily clad women, but people in this episode just in general, between the cronies, the henchmen, and then like that car show, I was like, this is weird. Are they trying that? And I guess that was where I was kind of confused. Are they trying to say something about it, or was it just they happened to write models there? You know what I mean? Was it an intention?
Yes. I don't know. I can't tell. Right.
Yeah.
And part of that is because by virtue of Calendar Girl being who she is, the fashion show is a commentary, right? And I think it's a commentary also because they put a lot more thought and effort into it than they did in the last fashion show that we saw, which was also kind of a framing device for Lana Lang, right? The flip of that is we make no commentary really on the booth babe thing. Nobody condemns it, but there's a lot more of them. Nobody lauds it either. It's just a really complicated place where I feel like, okay, this might have been a little bit of the blind spot, right?
Well, it does. And I do think it feels that whole scene felt very male gazy, the car show.
Very male gazy in a way that the fashion show was not.
Right.
And I think purposefully was not. So it's even within this very episode, we are looking at how maybe the people creating it are more aware of some problems than they are of other problems, right? Which is probably a good segue if we're going to talk about Bruce getting older and the Wayne Enterprises subplot.
Yes. I think, Joshua, that's a great point. I just on the calendar girl thing, the last thing I want to throw out here about her is just, and I'll get more into this in the alternate media recommendations, but it is again, they don't dive into it, but just inherently the idea, a couple different ideas here. One, that it's a dog eat dog world for women, especially in the world of entertainment, fashion. Like you really have like a 10 to 15 year window to make a splash before you age out of it, which is one that's a huge problem. But two, I think just as big of a problem, and I'll get to it. I media recommend for this, but it forces women to sort of, it pits them against each other in a way is overall not helping the cause of women in entertainment because of the way they're having to compete with each other. Like they're not actually solving the problem. It's really destructive and circular and very problematic. So there's that. Another thing I want to hit on here with her, Joshua, was before we get to the retiree subplot is
no, she's got at least one more big bullet point that's probably worth dealing with before we talk about the retiree. Yeah, at least one. So where's your head at?
Well, the fact that she's actually beautiful, like it's all in her head. Yes. Like she is still A+ model status. She's just a little older, but the way
she's just in her 40s. That's literally the thing that ruins her, is the fact that she is in her 40s. That is wild to me. I mean, it's so true to life, but it's just mind-blowing how on the label they put that in this episode.
Well, yeah, and the fact that she thinks she's ugly and hideous and she's not. It's like the way that women are forced to criticize themselves and self-critique so much that they don't even see their own value. That's heartbreaking. Yes. And it creates a really powerful motivation. Again, like she thinks these people, because of how critical she is of herself, and because these people ruined her career, she thinks that she is hideous. She's believed what they have told her, and she now doesn't think that's fair and wants revenge. And I think that, again, much more sympathetic motivation, one that I can get behind up until she's trying to murder people. But it's she lives in that space, and again, like the way women are treated in culture to just be convinced that they inherently have no value once they age out is just, it's devastating.
It's also a much better handling of mental illness than Batman stories usually do. And maybe if we'd seen more Calendar Girl, we would have watched the machine that is Batman storytelling kind of mess it up more. But as far as this episode is concerned, she is suffering from body dysmorphia. So I'm going to quote directly from Wikipedia, since I am not an expert on this, and I'd rather be accurate than in depth, right? I'd rather be shallow and accurate than in depth and wrong. But to quote Wikipedia, body dysmorphia is a mental disorder characterized by the obsessive idea that some aspect of one's own body part or appearance is severely flawed and therefore warrants exceptional measures to hide or fix it. In body dysmorphia's delusional variant, the flaw is imagined. That's kind of where Calendar Girl comes in, right? And if the flaw is actual, its importance is severely exaggerated. Or in this case, it's not even a flaw. Being 40 is not a flaw. It's just treated as such a flaw in her line of work that she has developed a psychosis around it, right? And either way, this is continuing the quote, either way, thoughts about it are pervasive and intrusive and may occupy several hours a day, causing severe distress and impairing one's otherwise normal activities. Man, this is such a better handling of body dysmorphia than almost anything we see with split personality or schizophrenia when it comes to Two-Face or whatever the heck is going on with the Joker. Right. Which is just sort of generalized crazy most of the time.
Yeah. The Joker, it doesn't even have
I love this. Yeah. I really appreciate this inclusion and approach very much.
Yeah. I mean, the Joker doesn't even have like a real disorder that we can refer to, so that makes him a little more, maybe gives them more liberty as writers, but also kind of weird if you're trying to actually represent some sort of actual illness. But I think that's a real respectable look. And again, I really think that if they wanted to bring Calendar Man back, just drop Calendar Man, bring back Calendar Girl, because #relevant, especially in the current conversation happening around women in media and women in the workplace in general. Like, a lot of those conversations are happening. I'm not saying there's necessarily been great progress made, but like, roll this episode out, roll this character back in, because I think that she has a lot she can tell us.
Absolutely. If nothing else, the end of this episode does the work of generalizing her to where she could return, right? So obviously in this episode, she's got specific people that she blames for how her life turned out. And she's not entirely wrong, but also kidnapping and murdering them is maybe not the best way to handle her stuff. But if you give her a little time to cool off, which now we've had 20 years, but I mean, if I could go back in time and give her just a little time to cool off and bring her back, then Batman's line of all she sees are the flaws, we have an opportunity to go, okay, but whose fault is that exactly? It's not hers. This is not how she would choose to live her life, right? And we could generalize her to where she is now fighting society more than any specific person. And we have to ask, okay, can Batman fight big picture society? No, he can't. And this is the part where superheroes as metaphor or analogy is so good, because he can sympathize with Calendar Girl's worldview that has been foisted upon her while also stopping her from blowing stuff up and murdering people. So we get to have like a meaty conversation and a good adventure story, which is basically peak perfect superhero as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the way the episode attempts to show that, to demonstrate that, is yes, Batman cannot beat systemic sexism on his own. Or ageism, I think, is where I guess where they're trying to tie in at the end. The ageism, against the guy who's forced to retire at 65. That's, I guess, their way of trying to say, hey, look, he's, as Bruce Wayne, he's trying to make a difference where he can. I mean, to your point, I do think, yes, making that a man that is retiring, it does take away from the more feminist message there. But I don't know.
Or it enhances it, Caleb. It could enhance it.
That's what I'm saying. It depends on which lens of feminism you're looking at, because theoretically, right, feminism is all inclusive, right? So I think it could have been handled better, but I do like that it showed how Bruce Wayne is handling things in his company based off of a takeaway he got fighting as Batman.
Sure. But let me push back against that, and you tell me what you think. Sure. Okay. Because for me, I was so confused by the subplot. I legitimately was sitting there like, what is it that you guys want me to get from this? And I think the reason I was having trouble is because I was so zeroed in on the good stuff that they were doing with Calendar Girl that I was expecting the subplot to also be like a good commentary, and it is not. It's actually very terrible commentary. And here's why I think that. So we've got Bruce Wayne struggling with getting older, sorta, which is, to your point, is supposed to contrast him with Calendar Girl, right? But this sucks because it's not a good equivalency. No man getting a little thicker in the middle or a little gray at the temples is dealing with at all the same level of societal messaging as any given woman ever. It's just not happening. Half the time, men get an aging like fine wine or just getting more distinguished message because society is built for men. Right. So I feel like this is a false equivalency that undermines them, honestly. Like, they want it to be a real equivalency. The creators, the writers, the show wants that. And it just isn't. And on top of the age problem, I have a problem with the way Bernie is treated. There's an extremely toxic masculine message going on here, I think. We don't know anything about Bernie except that he's retiring. And Bruce is not okay with it. That's all we know for 9/10 of the episode, right? For all we know until then, Bernie is excited to be retiring. For all we know, Bernie is like, I did my time and now I'm going to sail around the world. Like, I'm going to spend time with my grandkids. I'm tired of this. But no, when we actually meet him, he is despondent about retiring, and we can fill in the blanks. He derives too much of his self-worth from the job, and I'm just, I don't actually have a problem with Bruce Wayne being rich, but that's a much bigger, within terms of the fiction, that's a much bigger conversation. But let's be real. Bernie is deriving basically, as near as we can tell, all of his self-worth from his job, whose primary goal is enriching Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne then says, okay, buddy, you can hang around and make me richer for as long as you want. And I don't think that that's a really good solution to the problem, because I think they're looking at the wrong problem. And I think that the reason they're looking at the wrong problem is because they're trying to show Bernie's retirement in the same light as Calendar Girls, and it just isn't. It just is not.
So certainly didn't take it as an equivalency. It was more like I found thematically they were related, but I didn't think that they were saying that Bernie is the same as Calendar Girl, because obviously Calendar Girl, I mean, like, she was retired much younger. There's psychological trauma that's dealt there, like, you know what I mean? Like, so I at least I never took it that way. I did not see that as the writers saying these are the same. I saw it as Batman fought had to fight crime, and the takeaway from him was, wow, people aging out of their work once they're out of the prime, probably not the way to go. Which is why I think, yes, I think it would have that subplot would have been better had it been a woman who is being forced to retire versus a man.
Sure. Yes.
But
yes.
I don't think what they're saying is inherently. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I see what you're saying about, like, yes, he's going. That's a totally different, like, lens you're looking at it through when you're saying, well, by Bruce Wayne saying you can keep working for me, he's getting further enriched. You're not wrong, but I also don't think, like, I don't know. I don't think they thought that hard about it. I'll put it that way.
I think that's true, and I think that is the problem I'm getting at, is that they said, oh, these are basically the same. This is good. We've just made a Bruce Wayne subplot that mirrors our Batman A plot. And if you only look at it on the surface, I agree. But if we're going to be real about the fact that Calendar Girl gets so much more interesting when we gender flip Calendar Man, we have to be honest about the fact that comparing a middle-aged man retiring to a 35-year-old woman retiring is not actually a comparison.
Well, and that's what
you go
well,
deeper.
and I agree. I do agree, but I also don't think that they're trying to. I really did not take that they were trying to say these are the same. I really didn't. I think it was more like Batman fights crime, learns lesson in plot A, goes to plot B, happens to be a man. It should have been a woman. I think it would have supported, because I think in an episode that actually thematically is the details are very in line. That one felt a little weird. Either way, as far as, like, the old man enriching Bruce Wayne, I mean, that's you're really coming at it from a different perspective. You really have to dig into the problem with Bruce Wayne. If you're gonna open that can of worms, I feel like you got to go deeper into the problem as Bruce Wayne is a CEO of he's a really wealthy CEO of a company, which I think
I agree.
Which is worth talking about. But are you going to put that on this episode? I don't know. Again, Joshua, I think it could have been done better. So I don't want to, like, argue with you about it. I think it was a little sloppy, and they definitely didn't think through it. But I also don't think, like, them doing that took away from Calendar Girl in any way. So
I can agree with you that the concept of the subplot is not bad. The execution turns out being bad.
It's all sloppy.
Like, it should have been taken back for another couple of passes and some more thought put into it. I think there could have been a really good subplot here. So on that score, I can absolutely agree.
Or they just could have had a woman review their script. Probably, because I didn't see any women listed as a writer on this.
Ridiculous.
I'm not saying women didn't look at it, but I didn't see any credited. That's all I'm going to say.
No, you're right on. You're right on. All right, Caleb, I think that probably covers all of the admittedly big, meaty ideas that are going on in Calendar Girl. But tell me, if people enjoyed our read on it, our conversation about it, and want to see more things like that, either watching movies, reading books, comics, whatever, what alternative media recommendations would you make based on Mean Seasons?
All right. So firstly, I just want to say Mean Seasons, obviously we enjoyed it and thought there's a lot to talk about here. Watch it. A++. I seriously thought this was not going to be, I thought it was going to be a throwaway episode, but here we are with a really A+ episode. So to complement it, I actually have 3 movies. Now, I just want to prepare people with these recommendations. These are all extremely heavy. I mean, heavy movies. About women in the entertainment industry. So the first one is The Neon Demon. It's a Nicholas Winding Refn movie starring Elle Fanning, who is an aspiring model. And it is literally about that thing I talked about earlier in the conversation about women turning on each other to gain power in the system, and how the system, at least in the fashion industry, which is what that movie's about, I think it really applies to the entertainment industry at large, but how women cannibalize each other in order to elevate themselves individually, while also kind of destroying like the kinship that women share,
Yes.
And trying to succeed. So it really interrogates a lot of questions about the fashion industry, how women see themselves, versus how they actually look. Women pitted against each other. And guys, it's a heavy movie. It's dark. I'm serious. You got to buckle up for that one. But I do think it is very pertinent to this conversation. So The Neon Demon. The next one is Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, starring Natalie Portman. This one is in the ballet. But again, very similar approach. This one's more about the perfecting the art of ballet and what one has to do in order to achieve that true perfection. And in the case of this movie, true perfection is actually being imperfect because she wants to be the black swan and she's the white swan. So her director is pressuring her to tap into her dark side. So really, this movie is all about her psychological journey into trying to find that character for ballet. And let me tell you, it is also quite the watch. Very heavy, very psychological. And lastly, a movie that actually influenced, I would say, both of these films is an anime, Perfect Blue, from the legendary writer-director Satoshi Kon. And that one is more tapped into the actual acting and musician side of it, being a performer on that end. So all three of these movies are interrogating the questions that we talked about at length in this episode about sexism in the system, particularly in the entertainment industries, how women are pushed out by newer, younger competition. So anyway, I think if those are questions that you really want to delve into for one reason or another, these are three excellent watches. Can't highly recommend them enough. But let me tell you, do not watch them all three in the same day, or even two of them in the same day. Take breaks.
That'd be rough. Yes. Yeah.
It's a lot of watches. Wow. But Joshua, how about you? What recommendations do you have?
So I'm going to do something a little different than I usually do because I wanted to approach this kind of the same way that you did. But I realized I just did not have at my fingertips. Now that you say Black Swan, I'm like, well, yeah. God, I love Black Swan. Asterisk, Black Swan is the movie I use to describe that noir can do anything, because that is a noir ballet film, for God's sake.
It is.
It's amazing. But I realized I just didn't have like a ton of these in my mental Rolodex. So what I am going to do is challenge our listeners and also myself. Okay. So I have linked in the show notes a list from a website called The Cut that suggests, this is right from the headline, 10 recent films about complicated women over 40. And so my challenge to our listeners and to myself is to commit to watching as many of these as you can in as near a future as you can, right? Like climb into this thought process and see what it looks like from all of these different perspectives. Because if you go look at this list of 10 films, they could not be more different from one another, other than there's this underlying lack of value for women over a certain age. That's like and that's the only thing that ties them together. It's not even necessarily a huge theme in all of them, but it's there, right? And so it's just a variety of outlooks and viewpoints and different creators and different approaches. And so that's my challenge to myself and to the listener. Check out that list of 10 films and go as hard on it as you possibly can. I know I'm going to.
And Joshua, just on that note here, I've seen about half of these. And guys, this is a killer list. I'm not going to spoil too much, but Carol, 2015, huge, great film. Hidden Figures is a great one about women working in NASA. You've got Elle, which is a Paul Verhoeven of RoboCop fame movie, and it is something. It is something, but it's real good. And then lastly, Still Alice is another one I've seen on there, starring Julianne Moore. So this is a great list. I can't wait to dive into the half of these that I haven't seen. And then lastly, you mentioned The Cut, Joshua. So while we're throwing alternate media recommendations out there, this is a great list from The Cut. The Cut also has a podcast that is about precisely this. Like they talk about just being a woman in 2020. A lot of conversation around women's portrayal portrayal in the media and women and the entertainment industry. So that is a podcast you can check out and subscribe to. I have listened to several episodes. Highly recommend.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I was not familiar with The Cut before I went Googling for exactly this kind of list. And I feel like I have just unearthed a treasure trove in just discovering this website. Like if Calendar Girl whetted your appetite for more of this kind of conversation, The Cut will satisfy, it looks to me. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk and I am at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is animated discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, Joshua, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinemetropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We publish in-depth essays and podcasts on all sorts of films. You can find those podcasts and articles at thecinemetropolis.com. And for the podcast, you can look us up, the Cinematic Schematic, on your preferred podcast app. We recently did a countdown of our favorite time travel films ever made with Jacob and Zachary Burns, filmmakers who just released their new film Shifter. It was a fun countdown. Check it out.
And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/Pulp Diction Productions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And the links to the Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are easy to find all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about Two's a Crowd from Superman the Animated Series.
We'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.